About 7 years ago, I bought a fourplex downtown. It was a good deal, about $50,000 per unit, $200,000 in total. There was a commercial space in the front and a triplex in the back, but unfortunately it came with a horrendous tenant who parked his scooter inside his living room. That's right, next to the discarded food containers and dirty laundry. I housed him for 5 long years, and each year his behavior got progressively worse. He brought bed bugs into the building. He used to constantly clog up the toilets with his massive dumps. And then one time, he got into an explosive argument with his sister. He ended up slashing all the tires of her car when she was dropping him off in front of the building. This guy, let's call him Jim Bob, used to also argue with the guy who lived upstairs from him. Apparently, Jim Bob didn't like the heavy metal music that his neighbor played, so one day he decided to do something drastic about it. The next time the music was loud, Jim Bob marched upstairs, barged into his neighbor's apartment, and threatened to blow the whole thing up with an authentic grenade that he was brandishing. Not surprisingly, my tenant called the cops, and they immediately swarmed the downtown area with their cars and officers. They cordoned off an entire city block, and many people were gathering around, as well as the press, and the bomb squad was apparently on the way. I got a call at the school I was working at the time. I remember I was in the middle of a math class when the phone rang. Of course, I was horrified, but I couldn't leave those little darlings and have them not calculate the volume of a cylinder or something equally useful they'll use every day of their life. So I called my wife to go and deal with the nightmare scene that was unfolding. My lovely wife was all too familiar with our friend Jim Bob. And when she stepped into the scene, it was total chaos. The police had barricaded off a huge area. There was flashing lights and a gathering crowd of bystanders assembled to see some potentially free fireworks in our dodgy part of town. She was ushered behind the barricade and then brought up to speed. And she explained that Jim Bob was, a proper pain in the ass, but she couldn't for a minute believe that he was capable or assertive enough to track down a live grenade to threaten somebody with. So after swarming the building, the police had determined that Jim Bob wasn't home. Fortunately, Jessica let the cops know that there was one Tim Hortons that still allowed him inside, and lo and behold, the cops found him there, while the bomb squad went into his apartment and found the grenade. As it turned out, the grenade was real, but it had been decommissioned. Jim Bob had bought it at an army surplus store, and they take the explosives out of the grenades before they sell them, thank heavens. Jim Bob spent some time with the police, but he was unfortunately released because the upstairs neighbor ended up dropping the charges. He didn't have a problem with him uttering death threats, apparently. I was, of course, livid, and I immediately filed with the landlord-tenant board to evict Jim Bob, which of course angered him, and he couldn't understand what the big deal was and why the police and myself and the newspaper was making such a big deal out of nothing. Our strained relationship soured from there, and there was no love lost between us. About 4 months later, in February, just before Jim Bob's landlord-tenant tribunal date, he called me up and he left a message on my phone saying, "Hey, dickhead, get down here, my furnace isn't working." I reluctantly put on my gross landlord clothes and my big winter hat, and I went to see what was going on. When I got to Jim Bob's apartment, it was almost pitch black. Jim Bob wasn't a big fan of buying light bulbs or screwing them in, but he did have a Coleman lamp burning inside the apartment that he'd filled with diesel fuel for some reason instead of kerosene. Well, the pilot light on his wall furnace had ended up going out because a snowplow guy had pushed a ton of snow against the wall of my building, and as a result, the outside vent had been clogged with snow. So, it extinguished the pilot. I shoveled out the side of the wall, and I cleaned out the vent, and I relit the pilot light. And then I went back inside and I said to Jim Bob, "Hey, do you know who plows the snow in this parking lot? I need to speak with him." Jim Bob gave me a very puzzled look, and then he got up and he went over to his disgusting coffee table that was covered in cigarette butts, rotting food, and pieces of chewing gum. He picked up a greasy stained post-it note that was underneath a half-eaten burrito, and he handed it to me. On the note was my name and my number, sloppily written. After he handed it to me, he said, "I don't know who plows the driveway, but my dickhead landlord might. You can call him, but he's a real a-hole." At that point, I took off my hat and I stepped into the light of the Coleman lantern, and I said, "Jim Bob, it's me, Josh, your landlord." Wow, Jim Bob just frowned and said, "Oh, it's you. You're still not going through with that eviction process, are you?" Now, I've been a landlord for many years, and at that point I'd seen a lot of different stuff, but that was the first time that a tenant had actually talked smack about me to me. It was a first. A short while later, I ended up evicting Jim Bob after filing with the Landlord-Tenant Tribunal. I went in and I told the arbitrator about Jim Bob's greatest hits package, and I brought some photos to go along with it, and that was enough to get him out. But I wish Jim Bob all the best, and I want to thank him for all the lessons that he taught me. I learned to be patient with my tenants and never lose my cool. I also learned that a $200,000 building quickly appreciates in value when you get rid of a problematic tenant and you can renovate their disgusting unit. And I also learned to never abandon your math class, even when your building may blow up. And most importantly, I learned that grenades and apartment buildings do not go well together.